Hey, I want to introduce you, first of all, here to my son Luke, who is 17 years old. He is a senior at Webb City High School, right here. One of the greatest gifts that God can ever give to his people is a swift kick in the pants. I love McDonald's. Some of you know this about me. I grew up going to McDonald's. My parents are here. My dad used to take me on Saturday mornings, me or one of my brothers, to breakfast every Saturday at McDonald's. So I have very warm memories of McDonald's. Grew up loving, cheeseburgers and fries. And in fact, when I first met my wife, Katie, and took her out on our very first date, our first date was to a movie. Little Mermaid was playing in the theaters. And after The Little Mermaid, I took her out to McDonald's. I'm a hopeless romantic. And the year that we dated, my wife would tell you, I don't even think this is true, but she says it's true, that the only place that I ever took her was McDonald's for that entire year. And actually, on the one-year anniversary of our first date, December 8th, 1990, I took her back to that same McDonald's where we'd had our first date. It's the one right down here at about 11th and Rangeline. And Katie walked up to the counter there, and she ordered her Diet Coke. And from behind the counter, the McDonald's guy brought out this great, big vase of red roses. And they're from me, not the McDonald's guy. And I took her back to the booth, and I got down on my knees, and I proposed to my wife in McDonald's. I love McDonald's. Can I get an amen on that? Very good. And we got married and we graduated. We moved to Carbondale, Illinois to go take a ministry. We bought a house 3 blocks from McDonald's. And shortly after that, Luke over here was born. And you can understand now why it would be so important for me to pass along to my children all of the joy and the happiness that I too have found at McDonald's. Train up a child in the way that he should go. And so I'll never forget a particular day when Luke was about 2 years old. There was a blizzard that hit Carbondale, and it shut the city down, no traffic on the streets. And so I turned to Katie and I said, hey, let's go to McDonald's. And so we did. We went to the McDonald's, and it was empty. I mean, we were the only customers in the place, just the employees and us. And I wanted my son Luke to experience here the joy of a McDonald's playland. And so we went into the playland, had it all to ourselves. And in the playland, you remember these? They had a ball pit. You remember those? And I wanted Luke, he'd never done this before. I wanted him to experience the joy of McDonald's ball pit. And so we climbed up onto the top step of this ball pit. Luke and I, he's 2, and I'm explaining to him how cool this is going to be. And he doesn't want to jump in. For whatever reason, he was scared. I don't know if he thought there were monsters underneath the balls or whatever it was, but he didn't want to jump in. And so I tried to talk him in. That didn't work. There's no customers in the place, so I jumped into the ball pit myself. Jump to me, buddy. That doesn't work. And so finally I get up onto the top step. I'm sitting next to Luke, and I said to Luke, if I jump with you into the ball pit, will you go ahead and jump? And I mean, he's still scared, obviously, but wide-eyed, just speechless. He nods his head at me. And so I put my arm around him and shoved him into the ball pit. And I jumped with him, I did. But I gave him that friendly, fatherly little shove. And listen, sometimes that's a father's job. For their own good, sometimes a father has to give his children that little shove in the back, that little extra push for motivation. Call it forceful encouragement to do the right thing. That's what a father sometimes does. That's what our Heavenly Father sometimes does. One of the greatest gifts God can ever give to his people is a swift kick in the pants. Now, Luke and we've got some props here with us. Luke, whose chair is this over here?
No, that's your chair.
That is definitely my chair. What is one of my favorite things to do when I come home from work?
You go crash right in that chair.
That is correct. And when I am sitting in that chair, would I be characterized by words like energetic and thrill-seeking?
Absolutely not.
No. When I come home and sit in that chair, I crash. I mean, I am just vegging out completely. And what I want this chair over here to represent is I want this chair to represent a particular way of life this morning. This is called an easy chair. It is not called a danger chair, a challenge chair, an adventure chair. This is a lazy boy, okay? It's not called a risky boy because This chair here today is going to represent for us a way of life that is secure, that is safe, that is comfortable. All right? This way of life over here. Now, over here, we have another way of life. These water skis are going to represent a whole different way of living. Now, these water skis happen to belong to my son, Luke. Luke is an adrenaline junkie, all right? He's kind of a daredevil. He's what psychologists call a type T personality. A type T personality, T stands for thrill-seeking, is someone who is drawn to high-risk situations. They love, all those adrenaline-pumping, heart-pumping, blood-pumping moments in life. They want to live life on the edge, adventure. And Luke, why don't you just go ahead and tell them here some of the ways that you like to live life on the edge.
Well, when I was little, I started small, just making ramps for my bikes and the stuff that every little boy does. And Mom used to get mad at me because I'd actually have my little brothers go sit in front of the ramps, and then I'd ramp over them and stuff. But nobody ever died, so we came out ahead on that one. But then as I got bigger, so did the ramps, and everything got faster. And I went from bike ramps to four-wheeler ramps to rappelling out of my second-story window to, last winter when we had that big blizzard here, I got to go sledding off of my roof. And then as kind of a rite of passage in our family, we jump into Stockton Lake off of a 40-foot bridge. And so I did that, but my first love and my real true passion is water sports. I happen to be a founding member of the BLB 12-month ski club along with my cousins Ben and Brian.
Okay, so the BLB, that stands for Brian, Luke, and Ben, the BLB 12-month ski club. Tell us exactly what you do in the 12-month ski club.
We go water skiing up at Stockton Lake every month of the year, no matter the weather.
Every month of the year. So like last February when we had that blizzard and it was so bitterly cold, what did you have to do to go water skiing?
We had to chop the ice off the water to put the boat in.
Okay.
So.
And what was the water temperature that day?
38 degrees.
Yeah. How fast does hypothermia set in at 38 degrees?
7 minutes.
How long did you ski?
6 minutes.
Yes. 4.0 student right there, I'm telling you. Now tell me about these skis over here.
I made these in wood shop last year. They're jump skis, and I actually made a water ski jump ramp to go along with them. And this fall, actually, I got to go down to Stockton Lake, and we floated the big jump ramp, and I suited up in full football pads and a football helmet, and I ramped these skis. And I didn't even come close to landing it, but it was definitely worth it, and I'm still alive.
That's a very good thing. It was a great moment in our family. And in fact, God has actually been watching over you. How many times you've ever had to have stitches?
Only twice.
Yeah, pretty amazing, pretty amazing. No broken bones ever. Now, tell me what the skis say, by the way.
Dream like you'll live forever, live like you'll die tomorrow.
All right. And knowing Luke, I can tell you that is very much his philosophy of life. In fact, Luke, would you say this is fair? That your philosophy of life is carpe diem, seize the day.
Yeah, actually, our motto at the BLB 12-month ski club is carpe skiem, ski the day. So,
very good. Okay, so you're getting the picture here. All right. Over here we have this way of life. We're going to call this the type C personality. That stands for comfort, okay? And then over here, we have a different way of life, the type T personality, thrill-seeking, adventure, life on the edge. Now, if you were to ask me here this morning, which end of the spectrum does God want us to live on, I would have to answer this end over here. Because if you ask me to summarize the Christian life in a single word, the word that I would choose is the word trust. God calls us to live a life of trust, a life of faith, a life where you just totally throw yourself on God, where you give up control of your life, and whatever it is that God asks you to do, no matter how much it may not make sense, you just go ahead and do it. You step out in risk, you step out in faith. And listen, if you live a life of trust, it will be a life of adventure, a life on the edge. You may never water ski, you may never bungee jump, but you are called to be a type T personality. T stands for trust. It's a life of trust. Now, every year, there are thousands of people in our country that get hurt by household items, knives, power tools, that kind of thing. But the most dangerous item in your home may be this chair right here, especially if you're a believer. It's not dangerous because of the things that you do in the chair. It's dangerous because of the things that you don't do in the chair. There are steps of faith that if you get too comfortable, you may never take. Adventures that you never embark on, battles that you never fight, races that you never run. And I'm telling you, sometimes maybe you've seen this to be true, we as believers can get comfortable in a life of comfort. And we sit in our chair and we sing our hymns, leaning on the everlasting arms, safe and secure from all alarms. And it can be so easy to live life on this end of the spectrum, type C. So what we want to do here this morning is we want to look at a story from Scripture that challenges us to get out of the chair. One of the greatest gifts that God can give is to give his people a swift kick in the pants. And that's the story we're going to look at today, a story where God gives that very gift. Now, Luke, why don't you tell them about your favorite Bible story?
My very favorite Bible story is the story of Esther. The story begins when the Israelites, the Jews, are all in exile in the country of Babylon, and Xerxes is the king of Babylon. But before I tell you about Esther, I need to tell you about King Xerxes. King Xerxes was what we call a loose cannon. He was a mad dog. He was incredibly unpredictable. In fact, one time, Xerxes went to war, and he lost 300 of his warships to a storm at sea. And Xerxes was so enraged by this that he took a leather strap, and he went down to the water, and he beat the sea 300 times, one for each ship. Another time, a man named Pythias came up to King Xerxes, and he suggested the plans for a military campaign. And Pythias even offered to pay for the entire military campaign himself. Xerxes was so moved by this that he refused Pythias' money, and he actually gave Pythias a gift. But then, when Pythias hinted that perhaps his son might be excused from this military campaign, Xerxes was so furious that he literally hacked the boy in half and marched his army between the pieces. Xerxes was unpredictable, and he was lethal. So one day, Xerxes decides to throw a huge, lavish party for many people to showcase his wealth, his splendor, his prizes. And at the end of this party, Xerxes is completely trashed, okay? He wants to show off his prizes, so he decides to show off his most stunning prize, his trophy wife, Vashti. "Bring me Vashti," he says. Now, let's be honest here. Xerxes is not going to show everyone Vashti's sharp intellect. He's not going to have her come up in front of the class and do math problems on the board. He's going to have her show off her body, her beauty, and this is not a modest or a wholesome request that Xerxes is making. So Vashti says no. Oops, wrong move. Nobody says no to Xerxes. Vashti was immediately banished, never to darken the door of that palace again. We don't know if she lived to tell the tale, but for sure she was never the queen of Persia again. So here Xerxes is. He's single and he's ready to mingle. So he calls in his guards, his mentors, his advisors. He's going to get himself a new queen, and he needs some help deciding how to do it. And so his advisors, they're young, single men, full of testosterone. So how do they want to choose the next queen? You've seen the Miss America contest. They're going to have a Miss Persia contest, okay? There are 127 provinces in Persia, so that means there's 127 good-looking contestants coming to compete in this pageant with, yes, an evening gown contest and a swimsuit contest. And one of the girls who happens to be chosen for this contest is a girl named Esther. Esther grew up without parents. She was raised by her cousin, who was an official in the Persian government. His name was Mordecai. And Esther was chosen as one of the contestants. And sure enough, was God maybe at work here? Esther was chosen to be the next queen of Persia. Now, like I said, Mordecai was an official in the Persian government, and he was also, like Esther, they were Jewish. And there was also another official in the Persian government. This man's name was Haman. Haman was very important. He was Xerxes' right-hand man. We'll call him the vice king. Haman was so important, in fact, that whenever he walked by, everybody was supposed to bow down to him, and everybody did bow down to him, everyone except for Mordecai. And when Haman would walk by and Mordecai didn't bow down, Haman was just furious. And so in order to get revenge on Mordecai, Haman coerced Xerxes into unknowingly signing a bill that allowed for the killing of all of the Jews in the land, including Esther and Mordecai. Upon learning of this, all of the Jews tore their clothes and they put on sackcloth and ashes in mourning. But Esther did not know about this. And when she looked out and she saw her cousin Mordecai weeping and covered in ashes and sackcloth, she was confused and she sent a messenger to find out what was wrong. Mordecai told the messenger everything, and Mordecai begged Esther to go to the king and plead with him and use her power and her position to save the lives of her people.
If we were labeling this part of the story, we would put this label on it, a tap on the shoulder. Because that's exactly what Mordecai's message is to Esther. That is God tapping Esther on the shoulder and saying, Esther, I have a job for you. This is not just a little divine nudge. It's not even a whisper in the ear. This is a clear call from God saying, Esther, I've got something for you to do. It's time for you to step up. And what I want to say to you all, what we want to say to you all this morning is this: you have been given a tap on the shoulder. Every single one of you has been called by God. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, which says this: you were created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God has prepared in advance for you to do. So God already has some mission out there with your name on it. You have a calling. I heard a comedian one time say this. He said, my wife and I have 3 wonderful children and another one. All right? And that's terrible. God has no spare children. Do you hear me on this? God does not make extra human beings that he's not planning on using. God doesn't make people that he doesn't have a mission for. There are no bench warmers in the human race. You have a call. You have a mission. You have been tapped on the shoulder. And listen, some of you are new here at Ozark. Some of you have been here a long time. And many of you are still wrestling with what your vocational calling is. You're not quite sure yet what it is. You don't have that clear direction. You know, preacher, youth minister, missionary, worship minister. You don't know what your vocational calling is quite yet, but don't think that that means God hasn't tapped you on the shoulder yet. Because all of us already have been called before you ever figure out your vocation. Every one of us has already been given tasks by God. Listen, every one of us here is called to be a witness in the world. Every one of us here is called to make disciples. Every one of us here is called to take up the basin and the towel. Every one of us is called to go and serve the people in this world who are in need and who are hurting and who are least and who are lost. And listen, you have already been tapped on the shoulder. You shouldn't be waiting around for an assignment. You already have one. And there's a principle in the Christian life, a very simple one that I hope you've already figured out, and it's this: go until you get a no. You need to already be serving, not waiting for God to tell you, all right? You want God's direction? You can't steer a parked car. You got to get out of park, get into drive, and do something, and then God will show you what it is that he wants you to do, but you go until you get a no. Because when God taps you on the shoulder, the one thing you cannot do is nothing. And you look around the city, there are needs all around in Joplin. There are at-risk kids that need a big brother and a big sister. There are homeless people that need a meal. There are churches that need a nursery volunteer. There are youth groups that need a sponsor. There's an elderly person in this town that just needs a friend. There's a coworker that you work with who doesn't know Jesus that needs you to reach out to them. There are teenagers down at the bridge that just need somebody to come in and build a relationship with them and care about them and talk to them about Jesus. And listen, God has already tapped you on the shoulder. You go until you get a no. But Esther, at first, didn't go.
So Esther is now queen of all of Persia. She has everything that she could ever want. She's achieved every little Persian girl's dream, except now Mordecai has caught word of a plot by Haman to kill all of the Jews. After hearing this, Mordecai begs Esther to use her position to save her country, but Esther refuses. She says this: all of the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that he be put to death. The only exception to this is for the king to extend the gold scepter to him and spare his life. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. She's faced with a dangerous decision here. If she goes to see the king and he does not extend the scepter to her, it's sayonara, sweet cheeks. Perhaps that's why she doesn't go. She has every reason to be scared because Xerxes has always been very generous in his distribution of random violence. Some people are said to have a hands-off leadership style. Well, Xerxes had a heads-off leadership style. Okay, you may have had a boss sometime that had to fire somebody and they were terminated. Well, in Xerxes' case, okay, they were actually terminated. But perhaps she's not just scared. Maybe she's just too comfortable. She's got wealth, power, beauty, everything she could ever want, and she really just doesn't see why that should have to change. Why risk losing it all when she could just chill out and let the people solve their own problems?
And so if we were labeling this part of the story, we would call this the shake of the head. Because what Esther does when God taps her on the shoulder is she shakes her head and she says, no, I can't do that. Let's talk movies here for a minute, Luke. By the way, you know, don't you, why your mother and I gave you that name?
No.
So that I could say, Luke, I am your father. I'm such a dork. Actually, let's talk about the very first movie that your mom and I ever took you to. The very first movie that we ever went to. Do you remember what that movie was?
Was it The Lion King?
It was. It was The Lion King. And if you remember the story of The Lion King, you know that it's a story of young Simba. He is the prince. He will someday become king of the pride, but then his father is killed. And Simba runs away. He refuses, even though he is the heir apparent, to take up the mantle. He is what scholar Joseph Campbell calls the reluctant hero. And even when he's a full-grown lion, Simba, he doesn't go back and take leadership of the pride. He just abandons it to his evil Uncle Scar. And instead, Simba runs off with his two buddies, Timon and Pumbaa. And he just lives this, wonderful, carefree, happy life. And of course, they sing, Hakuna Matata. And let's see, for the rest of your days, it's our problem-free philosophy. Hakuna Matata. All right, and... he is the reluctant hero. Simba doesn't want to go. And he is willing to settle for the safety of the easy chair instead of the risk of adventure. And I'm going to be honest with you, young people here this morning. Listen to me. This is one of the greatest dangers that your generation faces. One of the greatest temptations that your generation faces is trading in the risks of reality for the safety of virtual reality. Luke, tell me again what it was that your friend was telling you the other day.
One of my buddies was talking to me about some great new video game he was playing. He said, hey, I went fishing on Skyrim the other day. I said, that's cool. I can go fishing in a real pond and catch real fish that I can really eat.
And listen, one of the greatest dangers that your generation faces is that instead of being adventurous voyagers through life, you become vicarious voyeurs of life. You become observers instead of participants. And you end up getting all your romance from Netflix. And you fight your battles on Xbox. And listen, around here at Ozark, we use this term. You'll hear us talk about accelerated maturity. And what we mean by that is that when you graduate at age 22, 23, we want you going out there with the maturity and the wisdom of a 32 or a 33-year-old. But sociologists say that your generation is actually in danger of what they would call decelerated maturity. There is this extended adolescence, and you look around and you can see 26-year-olds who are still acting like they're 16. And they're living in their mom's basement, and they're delivering pizzas, and they're wearing their hats backwards, and they're playing video games all the time. And listen, they trade in. One of the great dangers your generation faces is that you trade in a passionate life for a passive life. And I want you to hear me on this. That can happen even here at Ozark Christian College. And I'm not just talking about those of you who are sitting in your chairs in your dorm room and playing video games, although some of you do that way too much. I mean that you can sit in your dorm room in your desk chair, and you can read books about serving God, and you can talk about serving God, and you can write papers about serving God, but you never actually get out of your chair and go serve God, because it is really easy in the easy chair. Hakuna Matata. And when God taps you on the shoulder, you're just so comfortable that you shake your head. And can I tell you what will happen if you do that? Every time you shake your head, you make it easier the next day to let your gifts go uncultivated, to let your abilities go unused. And that day will turn into another day, and those days will become weeks, and weeks months, and months will become years. And someday you will be looking back on your life, and you will see these great, bold adventures that you never took. Great, bold prayers that you never prayed, exhilarating risks, but you never took the step out, sacrifices that you never made, lives that you never touched. And you'll be sitting there in your recliner with your shriveled up little soul, and all of a sudden it will strike you that there was this hurting world in need out there, desperate, and there was this great God who was calling you to be part of something bigger than yourself, but you didn't do it. Because when he tapped you on the shoulder, you just shook your head. You were just too comfortable. And God doesn't want that for you. And that's why one of the greatest gifts he'll ever give you is a swift kick in the pants. And that's what he gives to Esther.
So Esther's just chickened out. She said no. She shook her head. She's too scared and too comfortable to follow God's call. But listen to this. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that perhaps you have come to royal position for such a time as this." Mordecai gives Esther exactly what she needs, a swift little kick to her royal behind.
And that's exactly what we would label this part of the story. We're going to call this the kick in the pants. When Mordecai's message comes back to Esther, you've got to go. You were put here for such a time as this. That's her kick in the pants. Now, sometimes all of us need a kick in the pants. I mean, let's just, Luke, why don't you tell them about a time when you were younger that I kind of gave you a kick in the pants?
When I was in kindergarten, I was just kind of testing the waters, trying to figure out which sports I like to play. So Genius over here decided that I should play soccer just for kicks. And he signed up to be my coach. Now, you should know something about us. We are a baseball family. We know absolutely nothing about soccer. I don't even think soccer is a real sport. So, thank you. So Dad goes over here to the OCC library, and he actually checked out a book called Soccer for Dummies, and it didn't help at all. Our team went 0-8. But you got to understand that when you play youth soccer, it's not really soccer. It's more like amoeba ball. The kids just kind of like clump around the ball in a little herd and run around. And I was a shrimp as a kid, and I was not very interested in playing soccer, so I would just kind of run around about 5 yards behind the herd, cheering on my teammates, just pretending to play. I would work up just enough of a sweat so that Dad would take me out of the game so I could go back to drawing pictures in the dirt. This intense lack of effort did not go over too well with Coach Dad.
So what were some of the things I did to try to give you that gentle kick in the pants?
Well, Dad he'd take me out in the yard and, he'd kick soccer balls to me to try and make me more aggressive, and it didn't work at all. He even went so far as to get the movie Rudy, and he showed it to me to try and inspire me, and it still didn't work at all. So finally, in an act of desperation, Dad offered to pay me 25 cents for every time I kicked the ball in the game. I, Luke Proctor, had just negotiated my first professional sports contract. And at that next game, I totally transformed myself into a little David Beckham, without the Spice Girl wife. But I ran into the middle of that herd, and I fought for that ball like a maniac. And the first time Dad took me out, I said, "Hey, I made $2 in there." Next time he took me out, "You owe me another $1.75. By the time that game was over, I had made $5. And then Dad renegotiated our contract.
Listen, we all need a kick in the pants sometimes. All of us do. And so, listen, sometimes God comforts the afflicted, but sometimes God afflicts the comfortable. You see this all through Scripture. When Moses is too comfortable in the wilderness to go free his people, God sends to him the burning bush. When Gideon is too comfortable to go confront the Midianite army, God sends him a mighty angel. When Peter is too comfortable to go take the gospel to the Gentiles, God gives him that vision with the sheet of the unclean animals to get him off the rooftop and to get him to go see Cornelius. And all through Scripture, God gives his people this swift kick in the pants. We all sometimes need that. It's like kind of playing kick tag. I don't know if you've ever played that, but God is kind of kicking his people in the backside and saying, "Tag, you're it. Get up, go do something now." And that's what this sermon right here today, very beginning of the semester, is intended to be. This is intended to be a trumpet call for you this semester to do something for God. Don't wait. Don't wait until you learn a little bit more and you know a little bit more. Don't wait until you're an upperclassman. Don't wait until you graduate. Listen to me. Yesterday is gone. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us. Carpe diem. Seize the day. God is kicking you in the pants to say, get up and go. Go do something. Go find a need. Go meet somebody's need in my name. Go now. Go until you get a no. Now, Luke, this year, your mom kind of gave you a kick in the pants.
Yeah, Mom was kind of tired of me doing risky things that were pointless, like bungee jumping out of my window. So she wanted me to do risky things for God. She got me this book called Do Hard Things, and honestly, I can be honest with you, the only reason I read the book is because the foreword was by Chuck Norris, and I love Chuck Norris jokes. But I ended up actually learning a lot from this book. This book describes what it calls a revolution. It's what they define as a teenage rebellion against the mediocre standards and lackluster goals that plague today's society. This book gives the examples of Connor Kress. Connor Kress was a 15-year-old kid who heard God's call, and he started an organization called Dry Tears to raise money for digging wells in Africa. Talks about Zach Hunter. Zach Hunter was a 12-year-old boy who started the movement known as Loose Change to Loosen Chains, which they just get people's extra loose change, and they use that money to free slaves all over the world.
And I can tell you that after Luke read this book, this Do Hard Things book, I watched you step up and do some hard things. There's the kind of hard to love, down and out kid in the youth group that you really tried to make friends with. And he had a very hard conversation with one of his friends who was making some unwise choices. And he's part of the FCA at the Webb City High School, and he really stepped up. He's a leader in the FCA, and he challenged him to be more evangelistic. And I saw you do hard things. And in our text here, Esther does a hard thing.
So after Mordecai's call to action, Esther says this: "Go gather together all of the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So here Esther is. She is preparing for the biggest moment of her life, upon which hangs the fate of an entire nation. It is literally a do or die moment. She puts on her best clothes, wondering if these might be the last clothes she ever wears. And she walks into the king's court and stands in the entrance. Can you imagine how she must have felt, what she must have thought right there? Here she was, standing before the most powerful man in the world and deliberately crossing his will, with the weight of thousands of lives on her slim shoulders. She's just a girl. All she did was enter a beauty pageant. How could that turn out to be so eternally significant, so petrifying, and so vital?
And if we were labeling this part of the story, we would call this one the pounding of the pulse. Because that is exactly what Esther is feeling. As she is standing in that doorway ready to enter the court of the king, her pulse is pounding, her heart is beating. This is the most scary situation that she could ever be in. John Ortberg is one of my favorite authors, and in one of his books he tells a story, true story, of one of his friends who wanted to change his name. This guy actually literally wanted to change his middle name to Danger. This guy felt like he had always been kind of the play-it-safe guy, and he wanted to stake out this new identity. And so there's a long legal process. He had to go to court several times. And finally, at his last court appearance, Ortberg's friend is the last item on the docket that day. And right before him, there were these two guys who were suing each other, and they were so mad, so aggressive at each other, they got way out of control. They actually had to be escorted out of the courtroom. Well, Ortberg's friend gets up before the judge, and the judge grants his request, grants his name change. And so on his way out of the court, the bailiff, true story, stops Ortberg's friend and says, "Hey, man, I just got to tell you, you need to be careful. Because those two guys that got kicked out just a little bit ago, they started a fight out in the parking lot. It is dangerous out there." And Ortberg's friend sees this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And he pulls out his legal paperwork, he shows it to the bailiff, and he says, "That's okay, look, my middle name is Danger." All right? Listen to me. If you are following Jesus Christ, your middle name is Danger. Because when God taps you on the shoulder, when he asks you to do something, he's going to ask you to do something that is risky. God never insults anybody by giving them an easy task. Listen, nobody goes and watches a movie called Mission Not So Difficult, all right? When God gives you a mission, it will be hard, okay? It will be difficult. He says to Noah, "Noah, go build the biggest boat the world has ever seen." Moses, go face down the most important man on the planet, Pharaoh. He says to David, "David, you go kill that 10-foot-tall giant. Gideon, you take your 300 guys and go attack that army of 120,000 soldiers. Disciples, you little ragtag group of fishermen, I want you to go and take the gospel to the whole world." This is not easy stuff. And maybe sometimes you'll hear people say something like this: "Oh, God will never give you more than you can handle." Baloney. God will always give you more than you can handle. Why do you think Esther, in our story, asks all of her people to fast and to pray before she goes in to see the king? It's because when God gives you a job to do, it will be risky, it will be dangerous, it will require trust and faith and this desperate reliance on God. Danger will be your middle name. And I love Esther because she embraced the danger. She entered the risk. She stepped right into that courtyard. Several years ago, I read about this. There was somebody at the Mattel toy factory that messed up, and the voice boxes that were intended for the Barbie dolls accidentally got installed in the G.I. Joes and vice versa. And so hundreds of little boys were surprised to hear their G.I. Joe say, "Let's shop till we drop." And hundreds of little girls were surprised to hear their Barbie say, "Hit the ground now, hard, let's go, 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 go." Right? Listen, I love this. In our story, Xerxes thinks he married Barbie, but he got G.I. Joe, all right? Because Esther is not just a pretty face. She's not just a beauty pageant winner. She is a soldier who steps right up to the front lines. She steps right into danger, right into risk. God taps her on the shoulder, and this time she says yes. Listen, that's the kind of people we want to send from Ozark Christian College. I will never forget, a few years ago, I heard my predecessor, President Ken Idleman, say this. He said, "Here at Ozark, we want to send out pirates." And when he first said that, to be honest, I was like, "What are you talking about?" I didn't understand. I mean, I didn't get it. Today's lesson is brought to you by the letter R. I was like, "What? I don't understand." And but the more that he talked about it, the more I understood. Here's what he meant. Pirates are not passive. I know you've seen VeggieTales, pirates that don't do anything. But the reason that's funny is because nothing is the very last thing that a pirate would do. Because pirates are fierce, and they are ambitious, and they are adventurous. And pirates take no prisoners, and pirates give no quarter. And what we want to do here at Ozark Christian College is we want to send students who will sail right up to the very gates of hell, and who will plunder the kingdom of darkness and take new territory for the kingdom of light. We are not training settlers here. We are training pioneers, people who will blaze a new trail, spiritual entrepreneurs. And that's why you have ministries like Good News Productions International right over there, and CIY right over there, and Rafa House right over there. That's why there are growing new churches in Osaka, Japan, and Nagoya, Japan, and places all around the world, because there were people who walked off of this very campus and they said, "God, wherever you lead, I'll go. And it may be risky, and it may be dangerous, and I may not understand why you want to put me here, but pulse pounding, heart thumping, I will obey. The one thing I will not do is nothing. Go until you get a no." They stepped out. That's the kind of people that we want to send out of Ozark Christian College. And that's exactly what Esther did.
So Esther goes to King Xerxes, and she enters his court, and lo and behold, he actually extends his scepter to her. And he not only does that, he offers her anything she wants, even up to half his kingdom. But she simply invites Xerxes and Haman to go to a banquet with her that night. That night at the banquet, Xerxes asks Esther, "What can I give you? Anything you desire." But once again, she simply invites them to another banquet with her. The next night at the banquet, Xerxes can tell that something is definitely on Esther's mind. "Esther, ask me for anything, and it will be granted to you." And this time, Esther answers. Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor with you, O king, and if it pleases your majesty, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king." King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther said, "The adversary and the enemy is this vile Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. So here's how our story ends. King Xerxes once again exercises his favorite talent of killing people, and he kills Haman. Ironically, Haman was actually hanged on a gallows that he had built to hang Mordecai on. Mordecai then takes Haman's place as the second in command over all of Persia. Xerxes, however, could not repeal the law that had allowed for the killing of the Jews, because once a law was stamped with the king's seal, it could not be reversed. However, he did pass a law which counteracted the first law, allowing the Jews to band together to defend themselves and even to attack their enemies. The Jews won the day. And when Esther looked out her window and she could see her people dancing in the streets, she knew that her risk had not been in vain. You see, she got out of her chair. She got out of her comfort, and she did something that mattered. She heard God's call on her life, and carpe diem, she seized the day.
And if we would just close out the story with a label, the last label we would put is the thrill of the heart. Because as Esther looks out her palace window and she sees the people that she just saved dancing and celebrating in the streets, the people through whom the Messiah would come, they're saved. And I'm sure her heart soared because, hear me, I can say this after 20 years in ministry, there is no greater joy than when God uses you to make a difference. When you see God use you to make a difference in a person's life, when you see God use you to make a difference in this world, there is no greater joy. Luke got to experience that joy. Last story here this semester. Tell him about your sociology class.
Yeah, last semester in my sociology class, I met a kid named Jorn. And through talking to Jorn quite a bit, I found out that Jorn was a hardcore atheist. He's lived a really rough life, so I actually went up to Jorn and just said, hey, you want to go out to Sonic sometime and just talk about what you believe and what I believe? He said, to my surprise, he said, yeah. And so I got to go out to Sonic a couple times with Jorn, and I just told him what I believed and why I believed it, and I got to hear his side of the story. And God really used that opportunity. He had open ears, and I was just amazed at how he worked in it.
Yeah, and I'll never forget, I'd been praying for Luke that day, and when you called me after the conversation, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, Dad, it went so good. It went so well, better than I ever thought it would. And he said, Dad, this is one of the greatest days of my life. And I know that he got to experience that thrill of the heart, that in that moment, we're still praying for Jordan. We hope that, trust that God will do something in his life, of being used by God. But Luke, I haven't even told you this, but I'm going to tell you now. My heart had a thrill that day too. When a father sees his child step out and do something a little risky, something that matters, man, your heart is so full of pride and joy. And I'll tell you what every father's thinking. That's my boy. That one right there, I don't know how I got him, but he's mine. One of the greatest gifts that God can ever give you is that kick in the pants. But one of the greatest gifts you can ever give God is when you step out in faith. Because I'm telling you that at that moment, God is on the edge of his seat. And he is leaning over the balcony of heaven, and he is saying, angels, come here. Look at that. She did it. She trusted me. He stepped out in faith. He obeyed. He did what I wanted him to do. And God's heart is so full of pride and joy that his chest aches. And if God ever cries, it's at that moment when he leans back in his throne and down his cheeks stream tears of joy. And at that moment, I'll tell you what he's thinking. That one's mine. That's my daughter. That's my son. That one's mine.